Another day, another dumb take from an executive. So, you know how gamers are clamoring for the coexistence between physical and digital mediums? Because people like the idea of having something physical that represents some semblance of ownership over the products that they buy. Whereas if you were to go to a strictly digital future, you would essentially encounter situations where a storefront or service might shut down, or a company just decides out of the blue that they don't want to host certain games and products, and you'd lose access to them despite the fact that you paid for them. Well, here we have an executive who's a huge fan of subscriptions, who put the idea out there that people should maybe get comfortable with not owning their games. The following information comes from news outlet gamesindustry.biz. They interviewed this individual, Philip Tremblay, director of subscriptions at Ubisoft, where he discussed the possibility and notion of gamers getting comfortable with not owning their games. So this was all about, the future of subscriptions and the role that subscriptions will play in gaming, and whether it can gain a certain level of prominence where it can take over, your traditional means of attaining games, whether it's digital or physical purchases. Or as Games Industry put it, the question remains around the potential of the subscription model in games. What is it going to take for subscription to step up and become a more significant proportion of the industry? Here is what Tremblay had to say. We've had a rapid expansion over the last couple of years, but it's still relatively small compared to the other models. One of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having an owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. How crazy is it that we live in an era where the idea of owning something that we buy, or having some semblance of ownership over the media that we consume, that we spent money on, is now a foreign concept. They got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. Well, people still sell physical versions of music, physical versions of movies via, vinyls and CDs, or via DVDs and Blu-rays. People don't mind the idea of physical and digital media coexisting so long as there are options available for those who prefer one over the other. But then you've got certain uncomfortable situations where certain, say, movies or shows are only available via streaming, and they don't distribute that stuff via DVD or Blu-ray, and it's only relegated to the subscription service. And that's when you get situations where those shows can disappear forever if the service decides to cancel the show or to delist the show, which has happened. People are not comfortable with that idea. That's just the business model that's been forced onto us that we have to deal with, which is why people are glad that certain, shall we say, websites do exist to preserve this content, so that when they fade away, it can still somehow be found, even if they are less than legitimate means. And that's a situation that we don't want to see replicated with games. We have already seen how poorly the games industry has done when it comes to preserving classic games, or hell, even games that have released in the past couple of years. The notion that we should just engage with a digital future where ownership doesn't exist is plain and simply absurd. I'm so glad that the transformation of people not owning their games has been a slow one. As gamers grow comfortable, continues this executive, in that aspect of not owning their games, you don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game. So it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game. Well, that is so long as that subscription service continues to exist, and as long as the company behind that subscription service decides to continue hosting the game. This executive persists that if we go towards an all-digital, all-subscriptions-based future, all of the content that we buy will continue to exist ad infinitum. He said, I still have 2 boxes of DVDs. I definitely understand the gamer's perspective with that. But as people embrace that model, the subscription model, they will see that games will still exist. The service will continue, and you'll be able to access them when you feel like. That's reassuring, he says. Streaming is also a thing that works really well with subscription, so you pay when you need it as opposed to paying all the time. Yes, let's talk about how reassuring an all-digital future is for video games, starting with this article that I discussed in a video from way back, whose research found that 87% of classic video games are missing, are gone forever that is on an official capacity. You can look him up via websites that upload ROMs and stuff like that. Bless those websites for preserving games, but on an official level, 87% of all classic video games have disappeared. Just 13% of video game history is being represented in the current marketplace, which is made worse by the fact that stores for older consoles are slowly but surely starting to shut down. The Xbox 360 store, for example, was announced to be shut down on July 24th, 2024, and when that happens, over 220 digital-only games will go away. Then we have the Nintendo situation where they shut down stores for 3DS and Wii U, and that's over 1,000 digital-only games that are disappearing as a result. And then on Sony's side of things, they try to shut down stores for PlayStation 3, Vita, and PSP. The backlash was intense enough that they partially walked that back by preserving the PS3 and Vita stores, but the PSP store was in fact closed down as planned on July of 2021, and we lost a few digital-only games for the platform. 35 digital-only PSP games are now no longer available to buy anywhere in any form. And while we're on the topic of Sony, recall that in December of 2023, people were informed about the following situation by PlayStation. As of December 31st, 2023, due to our content licensing arrangements with content providers, you will no longer be able to watch any of your previously purchased Discovery content, and the content will be removed from your video library. It's not even that stuff's no longer purchasable, it's you will no longer have access to them even if you gave us money for us to provide you with the content you purchased. Now, it seemed as though the backlash surrounding that situation was intense enough that Sony and PlayStation felt the need to do something about it. So in a legal update notice on PlayStation's official website, it was stated that due to updated licensing arrangements, the Discovery content removal planned for December 31st, 2023 is no longer occurring. We appreciate your ongoing support and feedback. But the damage is already done. People have glimpsed at the possibility of their digital content going away forever at corporations' whims. And hell, that's precisely what happened when Google Stadia shut down on January 18th, 2023. They did issue refunds, which is good, but the fact of the matter is that people lost all of the digital content that they purchased for the streaming platform, where you don't even get to digitally download them because all of this is happening via streaming. And that's why I find it so funny that the Ubisoft executive brings up the fact that streaming is also a thing that works really well with subscriptions, so you pay when you need it as opposed to paying all the time. And he insists that the service will continue when there are plenty of services that have proven to not continue, and as a result, customers and users lose access to that content or the ability to purchase them on an official capacity. When so much is under the control of corporations and behind the scenes goings-ons as far as digital content is concerned, how can we ever feel comfortable about the idea of not owning our games, not owning the media that we purchase, and trusting that corporations will have our backs and that they'll ensure that we will have our content forever? When so many games have proven that they will not exist, when so many services have proven that they will not continue, when there have been situations where people lost access to the content that they purchased, this vision of the future that Philip Tremblay presents completely falls apart. It is a false future that doesn't exist. And in the case of something like Stadia, when that service shut down, people had to go through all sorts of trouble to migrate their progress from Stadia to other platforms, and companies who publish their games on Stadia had to go through all sorts of trouble to try to migrate players from Stadia to other platforms. It was a whole pain in the ass, and a lot of stuff was lost, including Stadia exclusive games that were only launched on this platform that now no longer exist because they can't be downloaded. They only existed in some corporate server. Hell, for certain games, even if you do own physical media for them, there's no guarantee that you'll have access to them forever, especially if they're live services. There are plenty of games as a service that have shut down throughout the past couple of years. Going through social media, you can see the kind of feedback that the Ubisoft executive has been getting for suggesting this idea that we should get comfortable not owning our games. Looking at this IGN tweet and scrolling down, you'll find just how many people are against the idea of getting comfortable with not owning our games, and how many people are lambasting Ubisoft for even making such a suggestion. And even industry professionals are chiming in. Here we have Samuel Dietz, who's the director of the Netflix Castlevania series. He tweeted, "I need the gaming industry to understand that the whole monthly subscription streaming deal is not a business model to chase. It's a freaking mess over here. It is is a blessing that video games are direct purchases. Never let it go. Referring to the negative impact that the domination of streaming has had on the film industry, and diving further into this topic is Sven Vink, who is the director of Baldur's Gate 3 and the CEO of Larian Studios. He chimed in by discussing why he believes a future where it's all subscription-based for video games is one rife with negative side effects, tweeting, "Whatever the future of games looks like, content will always be king, but it's going to be a lot harder to get good content if subscription becomes the dominant model and a select group gets to decide what goes to market and what doesn't. Direct from developer to players is always the way. Getting a board to okay a project fueled by idealism is almost impossible, and idealism needs room to exist, even if it can lead to disaster. Subscription models will always end up being cost/benefit analysis exercises intended to maximize profit. There is nothing wrong with that, but it may not become a monopoly of subscription services. We're already all dependent on a select group of digital distribution platforms, and discoverability is brutal. Should those platforms all switch to subscription, it'll become savage. In such a world, by definition, the preference of the subscription service will determine what games get made. Trust me, you really don't want that. A future that's all subscription-based means that it's not the customers who are paying developers, it's the corporations who own those subscription platforms who are paying the developers, and in turn, developers are in the hands of the corporations and not the players. And in that scenario, if you're not making games that appeal to the corporations and to the executives instead of the players, then you may not get a chance to be featured prominently in that subscription service. Whereas with the traditional model we have right now, a lot of up-and-coming developers, indies, you name it, have a chance to succeed if the players decide en masse that a game is worth purchasing. If developers' ability to succeed is put more in the hands of the corporations who control subscription services, if that becomes a new normal, rather than the players and the number of people who purchase those games, then you get a situation where developers have to play the algorithm game of what kind of game will appeal to corporations, rather than let's make something that we genuinely feel passionate about that may resonate with all these players, because publishers may not accept something new and creative and outside of the box because they'll think, well, no way players will, buy this game en masse. But you never know unless you try. And if the players get to define a developer's success, then that means developers are willing to take more risks with creative pursuits that may appeal to players in a way that executive suits won't expect because they have no freaking clue what players want. So yeah, on just about every metric, this idea of us getting comfortable with not owning our games is a terrible prospect, one that corporations would love, as that would give them more control over the way we consume content and what kind of content they get to push. A prospect that offers very little in the way of benefits to the consumers and to creators, and all of the benefits to corporations who seek to exert more control and generate more profits through new kinds of strategies and schemes. I'm not saying I'm against the existence of subscriptions. I'm against the idea of subscriptions taking over everything and there not being a balance of physical media versus digital media versus subscriptions. As long as there's a choice, then people can choose whatever they want. But this notion of us getting more comfortable with not owning our games, that is utterly ridiculous and completely dystopian. Something that he's presenting out there as a great situation, as propaganda for what is mostly beneficial to the executives and the corporations they seek to pump with profits and revenue at the expense of the player experience and the creation experience. But at the very least, that's one man's take on what Philip Tremblay had to say about the future of gaming and subscriptions' role in it. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions and takes are on all of this. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.